Today we're going to talk about Zachary Hughes. This is a really interesting case because Greg, you talk about the videos. I don't want to let the cat out of the bag.
Well, this has been a true crime story running just recently, and a lot of panelists and the Grizzlies pointed us this way and said, hey, check this out. The Grizzlies love it. Our guys love it. So why wouldn't we do it? Jury found Zachary Hughes guilty of murder in the stabbing death of his friend's ex-wife. He stabbed her 35 times and was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison, despite claims he was killing her because her child was in danger. Interestingly, because of his testimony, the police arrested his best friend while he was still on the stand. Interesting case. This is that testimony.
Okay.
35 times.
This
Know that.
is that testimony.
On your birthday, October the 2nd, 2020, how did you celebrate your birthday?
At this point, Aida had visitation with her mother, Christina Parcell. So this was the one time I saw John where she wasn't with him. And John wanted to show me some of his favorite taco stands out on Whitehorse Road. So we celebrated my birthday together and went to a couple bars, had dinner, ended up getting tacos at the end of the night.
At the beginning of the night, what was John's mood?
Very festive.
By the end of the night, had his mood changed?
Yes, it had.
Describe what his mood was at the end of the night.
Towards the end, at one of these taco stands, he became very pensive and even distraught. And he started to tell me about really grave concerns he had about his daughter, specifically when his daughter was with her mother, Christina Parcell. And he essentially said that whenever Aida's mother had visitation, he just never could rest easy until he got Aida back. And that he just didn't trust her, and he thought that she wasn't responsible and that she might even hurt her at some point. And I mean, frankly, it the mood of the evening took a big dip because of this. It was clear that he just was terrified about the danger his daughter was in, and this made a big impression on me.
All right, Greg, what do you got?
Yeah, let's watch. This guy's going to be a great example of what we call grief muscle. And people say there's no such thing. We didn't come up with that. That came from Darwin, and it is really a collection of 5 muscles that create the little horseshoe there in your forehead. We're going to see him do it a lot. It's interesting. I want to pay attention to when he does it, because he does it at odd times. When he says, when he talks about the kid was not with his father, you see the grief muscle, or with her father, you see the grief muscle. When he says the father was becoming pensive, you see the grief muscle. Then everything else he does, he looks cool and contained before each answer. That's a good practice. If you're trying to resist an interrogator, if you want to become thoughtful before you answer, it needs to be constant. And he does a good job of it. Let's see if he can maintain it. Let's list all the places I see that brow grief and illustrators. Father was pensive until he got daughter back. Didn't trust her, hurt her. All those he shows grief. Everything else, he's calm, he's contained. He illustrates areas of concern with that brow. At the end of this video, there's some disdain in his mouth or lower face at the situation, or maybe contempt for somebody in the courtroom. Can't tell which, but we can see it. It's a great practice to do this, to be this contained. He's a concert pianist. I'm no pianist. I'm not no musician. I can barely play radio, as they say. But what I would say is people who do this in front, and they're the only guy, probably have to have some kind of self-control. You guys who are musicians can talk about it probably better than I can. But I would imagine that plays into some of this control. Scott, what do you think?
All right, yeah, I agree with you. This is really interesting because his mannerisms and the way his approach to this, I see why you find this fascinating, Greg. Why it's such a good thing to cover, because like Mark, he looks like he belongs in a suit. I'm not comparing Mark to the guy, but I'm saying if Mark isn't wearing this stuff he's wearing right now, I'm not good with it. I don't feel good about it at all. I don't like seeing him in a t-shirt. I don't like seeing him out of wearing a jersey or something. I don't like that at all. And I think this guy's friends probably feel the same way about him because he's so odd. And as we go through these, you'll see he doesn't change much at all. And that says a lot about him, a lot about where he's coming from a psychological point. I think he does have some feelings. I think we see a couple things that make him uncomfortable psychologically. But I had a lot of questions about this going through why he identified with psychopathy so much when we start getting into that in a few minutes, but I'll talk about that in a few minutes. But his illustrators are very light and they're on point. Do you know who this cat looks like when he straightens up? Anybody want to guess? Because I think I nailed it.
Wait, don't be hitting my ginger cousins now.
When this guy straightens up, who does he look like when he finishes talking? Who does he remind you of? Zuckerberg. Watch for that and see if you don't see that too. Maybe it's just me, but that's who it looked like to me. But his cadence, voice tone, volume, all that's fairly steady. Nothing changes much at all, or doesn't change at all. But you're right, Greg. I won't go back over the grief muscle like you just did. But we're seeing that. We're seeing it at specific points when he starts talking about things. So that lets us know there's a little emotion in there anyway, somewhere hiding around in there. And I really think this is going to be a good one because as we go along, you'll see who he identifies with from an emotional standpoint, we'll say. And as far as the musicians go, when you're a musician like this guy, we watched a video of him playing the piano. Let me tell you something. This cat was awesome. He is still. I don't know. I probably didn't get to play much anymore. But he really was. He was spot on. So as his approach to this is probably going to be, and just in my experience, when instead of talking to a mandolin player or a banjo player who just grew up, or a bluegrass guitar player grew up playing that stuff and just learning from everything they've got and getting into the old players and things like that, you get somebody who looks at it from a mathematical standpoint. That's a completely different headset. There's not a lot of, and people will fuss with me on this, there's not a lot of, when it comes to creativity, the bluegrass folks got that down. But when it comes to the classical side, when you have piano players and you have people in the symphony and stuff like that, they're just reading music. But they are supposed to be infusing their emotion into that music. But it doesn't necessarily mean they're creative. And I think in this situation, we're seeing somebody who can, from an analytical point of view, see the music he's supposed to play and interpret and do that. But I'm under the impression he's really, 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 really analytical. And that's what I think we're seeing with his body language and his approach to the things that happened during this case.
So by now, you've most likely heard of DeepSeek, the AI model that rivals ChatGPT and is now a #1 downloaded app. But there's a problem. Every conversation you have through their app gets stored on Chinese servers and could be subject to Chinese monitoring and censorship. So if you want to test out DeepSeek's power without sharing all your conversations with Beijing, then let me recommend our sponsor today, Venice AI. Venice.ai is a generative AI platform that's private. They utilize leading open source AI models to deliver text, code, and image generation directly to your web browser. There's no downloads or installations required. And since China's DeepSeek made their model open source, the clever people at Venice AI were able to edit it to keep it private and remove any bias injection or censorship. But it's not just China that people are worried about. OpenAI has a 2018 former director of the NSA sitting on their board right now. Edward Snowden called this a calculated betrayal of everyone on Earth. So maybe there's never any guarantee that conversations are truly private, even with American AI companies. And we also know that these AI companies allow their AIs to only give certain kinds of answers. So it's a really good time now to look at Venice.ai, who pledge they don't spy on you or censor. And here's how. Messages are encrypted and your conversation history is stored only in your browser. Go to Venice.ai and give it a try. It feels a lot like ChatGPT, so you can do everything you've been achieving with your usual prompts, plus add more flexibility and customization. There's even this brilliant character feature which allows users to define the personality traits of a character that generates content, making it way more realistic, way more fun. You don't even need to create an account. Just go to our link, Venice.ai/TBP, and start chatting. And if you want the full access to the completely private and censorship-free DeepSeek model and other amazing features, use our code TBP to get 20% off the Pro plan. And now, back to the show.
Chase, what do you got?
Yeah. So right away, we're seeing extremely controlled behavior and slow movement. And I definitely agree with you on all of those points. I watched him play piano this morning. The lack of expressiveness and the lack of wrinkles on his forehead are a little scary here at the outset, because when we spend any time in our life like doing this is how we connect to other people. We will develop these little lines on the forehead. By the age of like 19, we'll get those lines. So I'm not familiar with the case like an investigator is, but when I looked into it, I noticed a lot of tendencies and patterns that we're going to talk about. At key points here, you're going to see his forehead wrinkle up, and it's just when he's mentioning the danger this girl is in. And Greg was talking about that grief muscle. One thing I want to bring up is his shutter speed. It is unbelievably low. When you see somebody in a situation that would be incredibly stressful to almost any human being, and their blink rate is normal, and their shutter speed, which is the speed that the eyelid moves to close and then open back up again when we blink, we see that extremely low. This is a gigantic behavioral indicator to me. If there should be stress and even fear, and all we're seeing is absolute comfort, this means something is way, way off. It's some people, especially with high-functioning sociopathic traits or extreme emotional control, might display a much, much slower response time in situations that would normally trigger some fight or flight responses in everybody else. Everybody else. This is because, one, they don't experience fear or stress in a typical way. So the amygdala, which is our fear center, is functioning differently. Two, they're processing threats in a calculated way instead of reacting impulsively. It's a calculated thought process. And number three, their parasympathetic nervous system might stay dominant. And this means they remain composed when everybody else is panicking. And this is all pointing to something a little bit scary. Mark, what do you got?
Yeah. Yeah. With the risk, Scott, of those same musicians moving from you onto me. So when you sent that video of somebody playing, I didn't put two and two together. This was the same. I thought it was you were sending this person playing, and it was something to do with Chase Hughes. So I thought, oh, is this some kind of relative? I didn't put the two together. So I've just put it together like in the show right now.
That's fun.
And my just brain went, oh, I see. Oh,
Badass. Wasn't it?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh no, he's a good player.
Yeah.
He's a good player. So I've spent a lot of time and lived with a bunch of really good classical pianists, not just piano players, like top classical pianists. Here's the reality. They are well odd. Okay. And I know some are watching. Okay. And I know some there'll be some classical pianists I don't know who are just playing Rachmaninoff right now. And they're going, I'm not. You are. You would take it from me. You're odd. Yeah, my kids' piano teachers, they'll be going, yeah, but we're not odd.
The piano mafia is coming for sure.
You're odd, and it's a beautiful thing. It's a wonderful thing because to have, as you say, Scott, to have that mathematical mindset, to be able to understand math and music in that way, and to have the technique and to practice. There was one pianist that I lived with. She had two Steinways in the house, and the first thing you'd have to ask in the morning was, so how are the pianos? They were people. How are the pianos this morning? And then you'd get like how the pianos were this morning. Brilliant pianist, but odd, very, very odd. Okay, now
lock your door at night.
yeah, very odd. Okay, so what do I see here in this particular video? It's very ordered how he takes the question from the lawyer, then brings his answer, his narrative, his performance, let's say, directly to what I imagine has to be the jury, and is really clear about laying down the narrative for that jury of John started off festive, then he became pensive because of thinking of the daughter's mother, and then terrified. So a lovely move there from festive to pensive to terrified around the danger that the daughter was under. A very clear, calm, assertive telling of the story. When I started watching this, I had no idea what's going on, no idea of the case. And I'm like, okay, this is really interesting because he really wants us to clearly know that this man is very scared about what's going to happen to this daughter. This is, and it's so calm the way he's putting that across. So calm. So I was excited by this as to what's coming up. And now I know it's a concert pianist, even more so. Let's have a look at another.
Hey, Greg, I'll give you that one for the speed. That was good.
On your birthday, October the 2nd, 2020, how did you celebrate your birthday?
At this point, Aida had visitation with her mother, Christina Parcell. So this was the one time I saw John where she wasn't with him. And John wanted to show me some of his favorite taco stands out on White Horse Road. So we celebrated my birthday together and went to a couple bars, had dinner, ended up getting tacos at the end of the night.
At the beginning of the night, what was John's mood?
Very festive.
By the end of the night, had his mood changed?
Yes, it had.
Describe what his mood was at the end of the night.
Towards the end, at one of these taco stands, he became very pensive and even distraught. And he started to tell me about really grave concerns he had about his daughter, specifically when his daughter was with her mother, Christina Parcell. And he essentially said that whenever Aida's mother had visitation, he just never could rest easy until he got Aida back. And that he just didn't trust her, and he thought that she wasn't responsible and that she might even hurt her at some point. And I mean, frankly, it kind of, the mood of the evening took a big dip because of this. It was clear that he just was terrified about the danger his daughter was in, and this made a big impression on me.
On your birthday, October the 2nd, 2020, how did you celebrate your birthday?
At this point, Aida had visitation with her mother, Christina Parcell. So this was the one time I saw John where she wasn't with him. And John wanted to show me some of his favorite taco stands out on White Horse Road. So we celebrated my birthday together and went to a couple bars, had dinner, ended up getting tacos at the end of the night.
At the beginning of the night, what was John's mood?
Very festive.
By the end of the night, had his mood changed?
Yes, it had.
Describe what his mood was at the end of the night.
Towards the end, at one of these taco stands, he became very pensive and even distraught. And he started to tell me about really grave concerns he had about his daughter, specifically when his daughter was with her mother, Christina Parcell. And he essentially said that whenever Aida's mother had visitation, he just never could rest easy until he got Aida back. And that he just didn't trust her, and he thought that she wasn't responsible and that she might even hurt her at some point. And frankly, it kind of, the mood of the evening took a big dip because of this. It was clear that he just was terrified about the danger his daughter was in, and this made a big impression on me.
All right, Greg, what do you got?
Yeah, I'm starting to see a pattern here. Let me tell you right up front who this guy is going to make me think of. He's going to make me think of the guy who shot the CEO of United Healthcare. because he's able to separate a person's value based on behaviors, which is interesting because, Chase, to your point, that might be the reason that he is so calm and so contained. He may not be at all a psychopath. He could be. Once people get to the point of reconciliation where they're going to go and do something, they're calm. They're calm. You think about all the, not that they weren't psychopaths, but all the 9/11 guys all were out doing social things the night before they went and flew these planes into buildings. We also know that, for example, actually one of the news anchors I know called and said, what do you think's up with the guy long before they found this guy, Luigi? And I said, he's a Robin Hood type. And she said, why would he show his face? I can't imagine a guy who's planned he's going to go kill somebody and show his face to somebody. I was like, because he's past that point. He's made a decision. And the reconciliation brings a person to smooth behavior after. And it's an interesting one, but if you've had your hands on bad guys, and Chase, I know you have too, they don't seem to have a whole lot of compunction about what they've done. It just doesn't affect them the same way. So it's an interesting, creates odd mannerisms. So I'm going to give him benefit of a doubt for a minute, but let me tell you why I think he might have that same kind of mindset. First thing is, when you're on trial, you need to be likable, period. We've all done jury selection, but we also would lean over and tell the guy, hey, you might want to be likable. I know you don't like those people, but you might want to appear to be likable because they're going to base their judgment on how you talk to other people. Here, when he starts talking about his adoptive sister, he shows confidence in his hands. He uses illustrators. He does some downright accessing, but still no pain or grief muscle like in a little girl story. And she's an outright psychopath, he tells us. He does, however, show grief muscle at the Russians didn't tell us. And she could lie for the heck of it. Those are two things that are interesting. Now we're seeing what he values and what causes him pain. I'm starting to see a pattern based on the value of the other person based on their actions to this guy. That's how you get a Batman, a Robin Hood, a Luigi kind of character. They're going to do something for the good of society or the perceived good of society. Every time we see this, let's start looking at when he's talking, where the grief comes up. In this case, it's always about his sister's actions, not about her, about her actions. Back to grief when he talks about between 10 and 14. And then there's disgust and grief, both at the same time. The brow, this is kind of an interesting one. He wrinkles his brow and he shows disgust as he said, I've never met someone like this since. That's powerful, condemning language when it only happens at certain actions and at certain pieces. And we just need to pay really close attention to that pattern. I think we got something here that could be really interesting. Mark, what do you got?
Yeah, agree on all of that. Look, now all I'm seeing is a pianist, because that moment where he went, thank you. That's the move you do when you've just finished the rack 3 in D minor. You know, the hardest Rachmaninoff. Thank you. Beautiful. So I can't get past that now. What else did I see previously before that? Well, this solemn attitude throughout and relatively emotionless storytelling, which is quite extraordinary, until, just as you're talking about there, Greg, we get incredibly disturbing. It says incredibly disturbing, and we get a bitter taste in the mouth. And this is his talk about his sister. Incredibly disturbing, bitter taste in the mouth. Absurd, crazy, gruesome. We see, for me, pain and some confusion in the forehead as well. So pain, for me, is that grief muscle again, and something else around with other lines here of thought and confusion around that. And someone like this, and we get contempt on that as well. And they look pretty good. Like they look like good stuff to me. So starts off emotionless. And then in the talk of the sister, yeah, there is some real feelings around her behaviors. So interesting. Scott, what do you got on this one?
All right. When he's thanking the person for, like you were talking about, for giving him the water, whatever he's going to do, he does that really strange nod. Now, there's a place in Oak Ridge when I go home, and it's called Billy's Timeout Deli. And they have this cheeseburger there. It's the best cheeseburger in the whole wide world. If you're wondering where the best cheeseburger is, that's where it is. That's what he fusses with. He says, it's the best in the world over here. No, it isn't. It's at Billy's over in Oak Ridge. So when you get a cheeseburger, and there aren't a whole lot of people in there, but it's a pretty good crowd, and the guy way over there got the same thing you got, and he knows that you got it too, you look at each other and you both go, that's what that reminds me of. Same thing like Hattie B's when you both get the really hot stuff. So there's that connection. So that behavior is really odd. So that tells us he's on the not under the impression he's much better than everybody else, but he's trying to put on a show to show he's knows what he's doing, he's under control, and this is the way you do it when you're a proper person. Going back to the suit he's wearing, not against you, Mark. You're not like that at all. I said I don't want to see you when you're not wearing what you're wearing now, but this guy, he wants everybody to think of him as perfect. Perfect. Well, that's perfect, Mark. But he wants everybody to think he's perfect. So when it's thanking someone, has to be above it all, has to be almost a royalty when he's doing it. So it's just odd. And when he's describing a psychopath, which is what he's doing, and I think he's trying to get right up next to it without saying it right now, he's describing it in true crime terms, although he's read about it because he lets a couple of other things slip later on, which we'll talk about. But he's describing a psychopath in the terms you read in the comments of the true crime things. Like on our channel, we get other than say, oh, he had shark eyes, oh, he did this and he did that. Those are the terms he's using. So I think he's trying to connect with the jury and say, I think he's talking about a psychopath, because he talks about how he's learned about him and the things he's read and things like that. But he doesn't allude to that he's read the medical stuff on him, just the stuff that he's out and heard and read about him. So he's describing a psychopath. But at the same time, he's exhibiting what one might exhibit if one didn't have the proper emotional makeup to be able to deal with people. I'm trying to say this in a nice way. I'm not saying he's a psychopath, but I think somebody that didn't know him, if you came in your house and that guy had accidentally come in, wasn't going to hurt anybody or anything, but he was there too, that'd scare you to death. You'd be, hello. How are you? You're like, well, this is it, man. This is it. I kissed everybody bye when I left, thank God, because this guy's getting ready to kill me. Because that's what he looks like. He looks like he's getting ready to do something, or he's just done something.
I think he looks like he's about to ask if you have any Grey Poupon.
Along with that, that's what would make it the scariest. If he did that first and then gutted you.
Well, if he was in my house, he probably wouldn't get that opportunity.
Yeah. Well,
he'd be downstairs here playing the piano.
Asking for medication.
He'd be doing some Chopin downstairs. He'd be on the.
It looks like he's trying to hypnotize the guy he's talking to. That's another thing. It's just weird, man. This whole behavior is weird. So he's spot on with the traits he's bringing up to describe a psychopath accidentally, to let someone know. I think he's talking about a psychopath. I think that's what's happening here. So I believe he did have this personality type in his life from the way he's presenting it. And I think maybe he's the one that had, I'm not saying he's a psychopath, but I think he might be talking about himself, as odd as that sounds. So I don't know. Is that everybody?
I'll go.
Okay, go ahead, Chase.
Everything he's saying is beautiful here. He's describing being horrified at a psychopath who speaks about horrible things in the same way you might make a sandwich, as he's doing the same thing. It's chef's kiss perfect. Here's the vocabulary he used to talk about her being a psychopath: evil, affectionless, psychopath, masterful, dangerous, vampire, and shark.
Exhibit A.
So the prosecutor painted out how cold and stern he was. It lays out the murder step by step without breaking a sweat. And this is in the overall narrative. And that's a strong sign he wasn't really feeling any remorse. He's also not showing any relief. And the blink rate is not something we can control. And shutter speed is not something we can control. People like that can be sharp and very charismatic, and like his polished musician persona that he's probably kind of putting that mask on or that costume on right now. But then it kind of doubles back with this altruistic angle that he's going for here, with which kind of muddies the waters. It could be a real, maybe an internal struggle, or just maybe a mask that he's keeping up. But he was a classical pianist and got famous for memorizing, I think, all of Beethoven's symphonies. And
correct,
I think there are 9 or 12 of them. But I would bet that he listened to classical music growing up. And something hit me while I was watching this: his voice. And I'm so excited that Scott didn't bring this up first and that I get to bring this up. I know I've heard that smug, emotionless intellectually superior tone before. And it took me a minute. But then it hit me. Almost every classical music radio and Sirius XM host speaks that exact way. And I'm willing to bet, with these kind of semi-sociopathic tendencies that have been identified, this was his childhood version of authority and intelligence when he was little.
Nailed it.
Those are the voices that he learned to copy. I might be crazy, but I'm glad y'all agree. But I can hear that voice. Next up is Symphony No. 2 in D major. It opens with these beautiful strident chords and really showcases the writing. Like the first, it displays revolutionary use of timbres and tonality.
On your birthday, October the 2nd, 2020, how did you celebrate your birthday?
At this point, Aida had visitation with her mother, Christina Parcell. So this was the one time I saw John where she wasn't with him. And John wanted to show me some of his favorite taco stands out on White Horse Road. So we celebrated my birthday together and went to a couple bars, had dinner, ended up getting tacos at the end of the night.
At the beginning of the night, what was John's mood?
Very festive.
By the end of the night, had his mood changed?
Yes, it had.
Describe what his mood was at the end of the night.
Towards the end, at one of these taco stands, he became very pensive and even distraught. And he started to tell me about really grave concerns he had about his daughter, specifically when his daughter was with her mother, Christina Parcell. And he essentially said that whenever Aida's mother had visitation, he just never could rest easy until he got Aida back. And that he just didn't trust her, and he thought that she wasn't responsible and that she might even hurt her at some point. And I mean, frankly, it kind of, the mood of the evening took a big dip because of this. It was clear that he just was terrified about the danger his daughter was in, and this made a big impression on me.
Could you just tell this jury what John asked you to do?
Yes. Given his concerns, John asked me that if I believed his daughter was in grave danger, would I be willing to kill Christina Parcell for $5,000?
What did you say when he asked you that?
I was shocked and insulted by the request, and I gave him an immediate and unequivocal no.
So he offered you $5,000 if you would kill Christina Parcell, and you said no.
That's correct.
At some point, did he revisit that subject?
Yes.
Did he make you another offer?
Yes, he did.
How long after the first offer did he make the second offer?
I'm not certain, but I would say maybe 2 or 3 weeks later.
Tell this jury about that.
He was becoming increasingly more worried and distressed about the safety of his daughter. I was as well. The more I learned about this situation and everything, and a lot more than what I've told you, I was also.
What was the second offer?
The second offer, he asked me again, if I became convinced that his daughter was in danger, would I be willing to kill Christina Parcell for $10,000?
How did you respond to that offer?
I told him, John, there's no amount of money that would ever tempt me to do something like this. And I told him I was insulted that he even thought that would be something I would consider. So I told him I would never do something like this for money. I told him the only way I would ever consider taking action like this is if I was absolutely convinced that his daughter was not only in danger, but that the only way to rescue her from that danger would be to take Christina Parcell's wife.
All right, Mark, what do you got?
Yeah, I think you're right, Chase, on that DJ thing. You should retire now that you've hit the
You'll never be better.
Chase Hughes is out. Yeah, and to build on that in this video, like he purposely comes up right close to the mic, and there's no background at all, and it becomes for me real graveyard shift, 3 a.m. sound, that and to his storytelling. So it's almost like he's trying to tell this emotional story and draw you in really deep with the closeness of his voice to the mic. He's probably had some mic experience with knowing that if he gets closer to it, he can get a way more intimate feel with, and as you were saying, Scott, a little bit of hypnosis with the jury on this one, because it's a beautiful timbre to his voice. But here's what's interesting for me. There's a few vocal clicks we get around this story. That's always a little bit of a screams red flag, shouts red flag at me when I get those vocal clicks. It means there's some internal tension somewhere that shouldn't be there on a story that is accurate. And there's no pain in his face, no confusion, no contempt when he's offered the job of the assassination. And I would expect, were he being more honest, I think, about what he's saying was his experience around that. Because he's saying, absolutely not. Absolutely not. If that were true, I would expect, because I've seen him do it. I've seen him do pain and confusion and contempt. So I know he can do it, but he doesn't do it there. So I'm concerned that that either this is not true, or if it is true that he was offered this, that he had some positive feelings around it, or no feelings at all, or certainly no negative feelings around it. Greg, what do you got on this one?
I'm going to add to that exactly what you said, because I'm going to look at where the concern and grief are in his face, meaning at what time. Around how the husband felt, we see it. Not at the time that he was requesting him to kill this. We see no grief whatsoever. In fact, he gets a little indignant, kicks his chin up, but he does a quick lip close immediately after he said a qualified, immediate, and unequivocal no. That's not believable, because that's not what he's done to now. So there's something wrong in that baseline deviation. And then it could just be, look, this guy, if you watch him play piano, he's whipping his head around and doing all that kind of stuff. Maybe it's part of what he thinks decorum looks like. We can't tell. But we can start looking. He could be trying to protect himself when he does that quick lip close too. So let's pay attention to that. On the second offer, however, now his brow does show some concern. And he says, if I became concerned for the safety of the daughter, boom, boom, boom. Now he's getting that, he's Batman. He's the vigilante. He's getting that whole thing going again. And we're seeing that he's showing a knot around any time that happens. He shows grief only one time, and that's about being insulted at the money offer. You can see just a little grief there. So I think what we're seeing here is a guy who can convince himself it's okay to kill somebody if he has a higher purpose. Now, I'm going to go on record here as saying, I get that. I get that some people need to be killed as a Southernism. People say that, the guy needed killing. Rarely do those people stab somebody 35 times. That's a little interesting. Scott, what do you got?
I don't think he got into 35 times before she was dead. I don't even think he stabbed. I think she was dead before he stabbed her. Because if you saw that thing coming through the kitchen or coming through down the hall, that guy with a knife, you're going to die anyway. You're going to die right then, because you're like, it's over. Your brain's going to say, you're out, dude, and you're just going to die. That'd scare you to death. Think about it. Anyway, so when he's talking about that $5,000 offer that he said he unequivocally said no to, he says, as he says no, he's shaking his head yes. However, and this is one of my pet peeves, people think every time that happens, that means it's the opposite. Oh, he said no, but he was shaking his head yes. Sometimes that's right. Sometimes it is. But in this case, it's not. It's a confirmation nod. I think if that did happen, which I think it did, I think he said no. I think he blew it off. I don't know if he's telling the truth, because those nods are confirming they're happening as illustrators. That's how you can tell the difference. Now, if it was something where he said no and kept shaking his head or nodding his head like that, and he kept going a little bit afterwards, then you can say that might be deceptive. That might not be true. You can't say for sure that it's not true, but you can look at that and say, I don't know, man. We need to ask more questions around that. So, and also, I think he's being careful with what he says. I don't think he's trying to be weird, but I think he's so careful with what he says, taking everything we've talked about for that personality type so far. That's adding to the weirdness of him. That's adding to his oddness, I think. Trying to watch every word he says and deliver it in this personality or mask that, because he talks about a mask as well. And so I think we're actually seeing a mask here. That's another reason that makes me wonder about this guy. I don't think he's a psychopath. But I think, I think he's got some behaviors that will make a lot of people think maybe something's up there, because it would definitely scare me to death if I saw that cat coming down the hall or trying to get to my house, No. I wouldn't pull over if he was, had car problems or something. If I slowed down and pulled up and he was there, I'd say, all right, dude, good luck, dude. I'll call the cops for you, whatever. Not going to help that cat. Chase, what do you got?
So between the jury, him looking at the jury and then back to his attorney, there's a 2 millimeter change in pupil size. His pupils enlarge when he looks at the jury. That's a big deal. What's so funny, Scott?
I can tell it's 2 millimeters.
I've done a lot of clinical hours where you have to kind of hold the little stick up and kind of.
Oh, just sticking?
Yeah, pupillary reflex. But this happened during the pandemic, when I would imagine gigs for musicians like this guy were drying up, so money might have been tight, and this guy Mello, his alleged 5,000 could have been a real pull for him, even if he didn't take it. And that's a bit of a gray area here, but it raises the question: was this more about moral mission in his head, or did the jury kind of peg it right that cash did play a role in this murder? So those texts that he had suggests a lot of planning. There's some text involved here. So the financial angle is very, very tough to dismiss. And as a Juilliard-trained pianist, I think, he had an intense amount of discipline. He memorized all these Beethoven sonatas, and he performed all over the world. This isn't something you pull off without focus. So that points to this perfectionism, maybe even some obsessive traits. One of the things he did was align rose petals around the body. Did you know that, Scott?
No.
He made a
called the rose petal murder.
Yeah, rose petal arrangement around the entire body. And he used roses in his hand to get in the door. But he left them there afterward, which feels very deliberate. He wanted the scene to have a certain look, like it was staged or something. But when we're talking about some of his influences and where he draws personality from in his voice, and maybe it was this classical radio, I think he could see himself as a Batman figure. He takes justice into his own hands because the system, like the police and the courts, are not enough. They can't do it. This now or never moment with the cruise ship, just is like Batman's urgency to save Gotham. And the rose petals are probably some version of a dramatic calling card. So he's kind of tortured here. He's sacrificing his great life for this young girl, just like Bruce Wayne did for Gotham. And Batman doesn't kill recklessly. No. But this guy twists that into justifying murder, ignoring every legal option you could possibly think of. And I think there's maybe some narcissism that fits the lone vigilante type. Rules do not apply if you are right. Rules don't apply if you're right. That's all I got.
Could you just tell this jury what John asked you to do?
Yes. Given his concerns, John asked me that if I believed his daughter was in grave danger, would I be willing to kill Christina Parcell for $5,000?
What did you say when he asked you that?
I was shocked and insulted by the request, and I gave him an immediate and unequivocal no.
So he offered you $5,000 if you would kill Christina Parcell, and you said no.
That's correct.
At some point, did he revisit that subject?
Yes.
Did he make you another offer?
Yes, he did.
How long after the first offer did he make the second offer?
I'm not certain, but I would say maybe 2 or 3 weeks later.
Tell this jury about that.
He was becoming increasingly more worried and distressed about the safety of his daughter. I was as well. The more I learned about this situation and everything, and a lot more than what I've told you, I was also.
What was the second offer?
The second offer, he asked me again, if I became convinced that his daughter was in danger, would I be willing to kill Christina Parcell for $10,000?
What did you, or how did you respond to that offer?
I told him, John, there's no amount of money that would ever tempt me to do something like this. And I told him I was insulted that he even thought that would be something I would consider. So I told him I would never do something like this for money. I told him the only way I would ever consider taking action like this is if I was absolutely convinced that his daughter was not only in danger, but that the only way to rescue her from that danger would be to take Christina Parcell's life.
Where were the winds on October 12th and 13th?
They were in Europe.
And ultimately, did you take Christina Parcell's life on October the 13th?
Yes, because I believed it was absolutely necessary to save Aida, and I was right.
Objection, Your Honor. It's sustained. I ask you to disregard the testimony that you just heard.
I want to talk about the timing. You've alluded to it a little bit, but I want to be more specific. October the 13th, describe for the jury why you felt that was the time, why you believed or why it was necessary to do it on October the 13th, specifically, or in this period of time.
I had been wrestling with this since June. As I previously stated, since the end of June, I believed Aida was in complete and grave danger every moment of her life that she was living with her mother. And the other things that I had tried to do to save her from that were not working. So I was having this incredible wrestling match within myself for these months, feeling that I needed to do something to save her, and yet feeling this incredible reluctance to do the one thing that I knew would save her because of how terrible I knew it would be to do it, even though I believed it would be right. So by the time October 13th rolled around, I had been grappling with this for a long time. And I was experiencing a tremendous amount of guilt that I had waited as long as I did because I should have acted sooner. And I didn't do that. So I had come to the realization that I had gotten this offer to go on this cruise ship, and I would have been leaving the country for a long time. Essentially, it was now or never. I had an opportunity to save her from a danger that I knew she was in, and that I knew was not going to cease. And I just couldn't go on with my life and leave her to drown. I mean, I had a great life. I had everything. I made money doing what I loved. I was going to be going to the South Pacific to play concerts for rich people on cruise ships. I mean, but how could I go and enjoy that and know that I was leaving a kid to her fate, a kid who thought that I was her friend? I would never have been able to look at myself in the mirror again if I had done that. So,
Greg, what do you got?
So here we go again. Let's look at, there's no grief when he talks about taking her life. There's some grief at protecting the daughter. It may not be grief. It may be some other emotion, but those muscles are all contracting around that. This is the only time we really see him smile when he says, my life was perfect. How could I abandon her? The only real smile we see. Really interesting. That's resolve, in my opinion. I think whatever he is, and Chase, you and I agree, we're headed toward Batman. He's a vigilante. He's got to do this thing. This is the Luigi personality that we're all going to see on trial for killing United Healthcare CEO. It's going to come. We're going to see the same kind of behavior. I would venture to say, you can mark me down now, and if I'm wrong, I'll come back and say I was wrong. But I'll bet we see some of the same stuff. These people will get to a point, they relax, and they're even flirtatious. I don't know, this guy could be flirtatious, not sure how that works. But if you're a vigilante, you come to resolution. Look, anybody can revolt. Anybody can do the right thing for the wrong reason or the wrong thing for the right reason. My first documented ancestor in the United States was hanged for treason against the crown in 1666. 100 years later, his picture would be on money. But now, you don't even know who he is. So it's a matter of whether you're right in the public eye or not. That could play out with Luigi when this whole thing goes. But the jury gets to decide. In this case, they did decide. And this guy is odd, Scott. They decided he was odd enough, and that whatever the reason, he's going to prison for the rest of his life. What do you got? Is that Chase? You just went?
Yeah.
Chase, what do you got?
So let's take a couple of lines that he says here. He says, yes, because I believed it was absolutely necessary to save Ada, I think, and I was right. And I'm paraphrasing here, but he says, I would never have been able to look at myself in the mirror again if I had done that. He frames the murder as this moral imperative. So he positions himself as the sole arbiter of right and wrong. Essentially, his assertion was, and I was right. This is a deep-seated belief in his own judgment and just dismissing any external validation, like a jury might be, or police. You don't want to dismiss external validation when you're in front of a jury. But this aligns with very narcissistic traits, specifically this grandiosity and entitlement. He casts himself as, maybe Mark will correct me here, but I think it's called a tragic hero. In the story here, he's sacrificing his great life on the cruise ship for this higher cause. And this kind of pumps up his self-image. The mirror comment is something I think he thought up from watching movies, probably. And two other lines really stood out to me. He says, I had gotten this offer to go on this cruise ship, and I would have been leaving the country for a long time. It was now or never. And then he says, I was going to be in the South Pacific to play these concerts for rich people on cruise ships. I'm paraphrasing. That this impending cruise ship, this looming deadline, is a hero's journey itself. It acts as this deadline pushing the story forward, and it forced him to resolve this, what I think he calls it a wrestling match. mentioning the South Pacific and rich people. He's flexing his status, reinforcing maybe some narcissistic traits, but it also shows a huge contrast. He's willing to tank this lucrative life for this act. It's maybe a symphonic storyline that he's composed for the jury here. But he presents as this dude convinced that he is absolutely righteous. And this young girl is the anchor to justify this extreme violence. And I think his talking about his introspection lacks zero focus on the victim. And I think this suggests a sociopathic detachment, maybe masked by some kind of a savior complex. This ritualistic rose petal shit that he arranged around the victim's body, and this story here kind of just paint a picture of a person who stages both actions and stages narratives with absolute precision, and they're driven by his ego and maybe an extremely warped sense of righteousness. That's all I got. Mark, what do you got?
So tragic hero. Every tragic hero has a fatal flaw, the thing that causes them to go from that high place to that low place. In Hamlet's case, it's indecision. He's a prince, but indecision means that he dies in the end. It's a tragedy for him. This character's fatal flaw, I would say, he's putting forward as responsibility. If he hadn't been so responsible for this child who saw him as a friend, he would have been on that cruise playing Rachmaninoff to rich people and having an incredible life. But because, in the narrative that he tells, because of this responsibility, he goes and stabs somebody 30 odd times. I mean, that's where it's like, hang on, that's more than over the top. And he says, to your point, Chase, he says he'd been wrestling with it since June, and it was an incredible wrestling match. But we don't see any of that. We don't see any of that in the action of his hands. We see nothing of this wrestling match in his face. And here's somebody who wrestles with the piano every day, and we're not seeing any of that wrestling going on. So I can't quite believe that he had an internal wrestling match with this. He says, again, you mentioned it, Chase, I knew it would be right, but there's some vocal clicks around that. There's not a lot else around that because he doesn't do a lot else. But for me, those vocal clicks suggest to me that there's some tension around this idea of I knew it would be right. I think you're right. He's putting forward the story of the Dark Knight, but I think there's a good possibility inside that he knows he's not the Dark Knight, and he's done this for other reasons.
He's
Scott,
got hockey pants.
yeah. Scott, what are you going to
Could be. I really don't see much out of place here. And the only thing that gives me pause is if the father wanted the woman dead so bad, why would he just do it? It's his kid that's in trouble, right? Isn't his daughter the one that he thinks he's going to kill? Then wouldn't you say, you wouldn't tell anybody, man. You'd go out
Find
and
a weak
take care of
link.
that.
Find a weak link.
When all's said and done, I pretty much, I believe him. I think he did it, But the odd thing is, from an emotional standpoint, man, we're not seeing anything at all. Not even a little bit. I mean, you got something up there going on in the brow, up in the glabella and all that, but it's nothing. But I don't think he's a psychopath. I really don't. I think he's got some what you would call psychopathic traits, but I don't think that's what we're looking at here. So, and he has no problem saying that he did it. That's another thing. As he's admitting to it, there's no, I did, nothing, no trying to hold it back, no nothing. Didn't have a problem with it. So I really think he thought he was in the right.
Where were the winds on October 12th and 13th?
They were in Europe.
And ultimately, did you take Christina Parcell's life on October the 13th?
Yes, because I believed it was absolutely necessary to save Aida, and I was right.
Objection, Your Honor.
It's the same. I ask you to disregard the testimony that you just heard.
I want to talk about the timing. You've alluded to it a little bit, but I want to be more specific. October the 13th. Describe for the jury why you felt that was the time, or why you waited, or why it was necessary to do it on October the 13th, specifically, or in this period of time.
I had been wrestling with this since June. As I previously stated, since the end of June, I believed Aida was in complete and grave danger every moment of her life that she was living with her mother. And the other things that I had tried to do to save her from that were not working. So I was having this incredible wrestling match within myself for these months, feeling that I needed to do something to save her, and yet feeling this incredible reluctance to do the one thing that I knew would save her, because of how terrible I knew it would be to do it, even though I believed it would be right. So by the time October 13th rolled around, I had been grappling with this for a long time, and I was experiencing a tremendous amount of guilt that I had waited as long as I did, because I should have acted sooner, and I didn't do that. So I had come to the realization that I had gotten this offer to go on this cruise ship, and I would have been leaving the country for a long time. Essentially, it was now or never. I had an opportunity to save her from a danger that I knew she was in, and that I knew was not going to cease. And I just couldn't go on with my life and leave her to drown. I mean, I had a great life. I had everything. I made money doing what I loved. I was going to be going to the South Pacific to play concerts for rich people on cruise ships. I mean, but how could I go and enjoy that and know that I was leaving a kid to her fate, a kid who thought that I was her friend? I would never have been able to look at myself in the mirror again if I had done that. So
that was a fine group of videos we saw right there. It's one of the first times we've seen someone actually admit to killing someone right there on the stand. You know, you see it on television and you dream about being the attorney that makes that happen. Oh, Mark, why don't you tell us how things look to you?
Well, look, here's what I'd say. First of all, if you are a top concert pianist out there, I'm not suggesting, Scott isn't suggesting, nobody here is suggesting that you're anything close to psychopathic.
No.
But you are odd. You got to admit, like you are, it's an outlier. It's a world of outliers. The world of top concert pianists is a world of extraordinary outliers. And I think that's what we saw here, an extraordinary outlier. I'm not convinced that he really felt he is the Dark Knight. He is a vigilante. He is doing the right thing. I think there's some deep oddness below the surface that caused him to do this murder for other reasons. That's just my hunch. Chase, what do you think?
You know what I always say? The mask is usually the opposite of what it's concealing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll leave you with that. But when somebody sees himself as the smartest person in the room and they don't feel bound by normal morality, they start making their own rules every time. There's no exception to that. That's what's happening here. He's not just telling a story, he's constructing one, or he's the genius, this tragic hero. He's the one who who really understands what needed to be done, and you just don't. And the way he talks, like the way he moves, the way he frames everything, it all points to a guy who thinks he's above everything, like he's conducting a symphony while everybody else is just fumbling through notes. But I think the problem here with seeing yourself as the only one who gets it is that it can justify anything, even murder, as we see here. Greg?
Yeah, I agree. If you're living in a world that's so cloistered, you become the only person who matters, which is what we're seeing here. This person lives in an elitist world, whatever you want to call elitist. An elite pianist is an elitist. You know, in this case, in his world, he's surrounded by people who admire him constantly. And he can even create his own morality if he's not talking to people all the time. This guy's odd. Look, this is not a guy, he says he's going to the bar. He's not a guy who's striking up a conversation with a guy next to him. I think it would be an odd conversation. He probably has a cloistered group of people, and he has evolved his beliefs to the point that I think I think, Mark, to your point, there's probably something in there that's causing him to do it. And it is rewarding in that he has just become a martyr, sacrificed all this brilliance to save a child that is his friend that he had professed friendship to. I think we're seeing a whole lot of odd, Scott, and with you. But again, if you go back to in the 1660s, the guy who tried to overthrow the crown was hanged for it. And in 1776, people see it differently. So let's see how this plays out for a guy who shoots the head of one of the largest insurance companies in the U.S. and then is applauded and people are cheering for him. Lots of people are cheering for that guy. What's the difference? You have to ask yourself that question. Scott, what do you got?
I really like this one. I wish I had known that was when he came out and said he did. I thought he delivered it like he had done it before, like he'd said it before, and it was already taken care of. So I wasn't aware of that. And I really like this one because we got to see someone act almost like the TV psychopath that you always say, oh, wow, that guy's probably a psychopath. So he has those traits, but he doesn't. I don't think he's a psychopath, but obviously he's able to do some things that they can do because it didn't look like any of the things he did bothered him from an emotional aspect or perspective. He didn't look like he has any true grief at all or any remorse for that. Because again, that could be he's leaning hard on that thing where he thinks he's done the right thing and he's saved a life, and that life was worth taking for saving the other one. You know, in some cases it is, and it's true. But I don't know, man. I don't know. But I really liked it because we got to see somebody slide through all these videos as looking like the classic psychopath in a lot of cases. All right, fellas. Thanks for another good one, and we'll see you next time.